The Windies left the World Cup earlier than their fans wanted, as their 2 wins from 9 games was only good enough for 9th in the 10-team table. The sense of fan frustration is perhaps greater, given that in some of the 6 matches the Windies lost, they were actually in position to force a win. Now, in the post-mortem, which has inevitably followed, Windies star Shea Hope rejected claims that the coaching change on the eve of the World Cup is to be blamed for the poor results. According to Hope, the players have learned much from their experience in England and Wales. To continue the post-World Cup evaluation, we're being joined by Cricket West Indies Director of Cricket, Jimmy Adams. Jimmy, welcome to the SportsMax Zone.
Good evening.
Good. From your perspective, as you saw it, well, let me start by saying this. The quantitative analysis of the World Cup is done, because we know we played 9 games, we won 2, lost 6, and there was 1 no result. So it's time now for the qualitative assessment. And from where you sat, how did you see the boys function in England and Wales, and with the input, of course, from the staff, which takes care of things off the field?
Well, you sort of identified, or you've got there before me in terms of speaking to the process. We are now going through the whole issue of debriefing the tournament, reflecting on the tournament, and I'll be sort of managing that process through getting together with team management and players over the course of the next couple of weeks to get some feedback and thoughts and preparing a report that will go to the board on my views on it and potential recommendations going forward. Until I get to the point where I've had these conversations, I don't want to be a bit premature in making sort of any bold assessments. What I will say is that, like any West Indian fan, I too am disappointed that we weren't able to qualify for the semis and go on and win the tournament. But a proper review had to be done, certainly before I start making comments on potential assessments of what happened, and even in terms of what we would like to do going forward.
Hear you on that, and I know, of course, I accept that the review has to be done and the consultations have to be made, but I'd like to ask, I'd like to press on by asking, based on what you saw of the other 9 teams in the tournament and what the Windies offered, was 9th an accurate reflection of this team's potential in England and Wales?
I don't think 9th is a reflection of potential, but potential doesn't win tournaments. Consistent performances in tournaments, and therefore the part of the sort of review and reflection on the tournament is to find out what might have inhibited a group from being more consistent than they were in the end.
In terms of targets, can you remind us of those targets that were set in front of the management team going into the World Cup?
Well, the first target was to try and qualify for the semi-final.
The first target was a semi-final qualification?
Was to attempt to qualify for a semi-final, but then that's the target that every team would have had. We were no different from anybody else.
What I'm trying to narrow down is whether or not we fell short, because I found curious, and not just me alone, based on the responses we get from the fans of the cricket around the Caribbean, when Floyd Reefer said post the World Cup that, you know, he was disappointed not to make the semi-finals, as he should be. And then I looked back at what he said before going to England and Wales, that the aim was to win the World Cup. I was asking myself, well, what if the performance targets that he was to meet were something different from simply winning or simply making the last 4? You're saying that the broad target was just to make the semi-final. There was no other milestone achievement that the management team was responsible to deliver?
There would have been other targets, but this is not a time or place to share that, especially not at this point in time.
Well, all right. Let's get to the issue of the coaching staff. Even though you've not done your review, I still am going to ask you, people say that it had a debilitating effect. Those closest to the teams, of course, say nonsense. Based on your involvement with that process, if you could have gone back in time, would you still have made the decision or supported the decision? Sorry, not made the decision. Would you still have supported the decision to install the management team that took the team to England and Wales?
Right now, that's a redundant question. The key issue for me is out of a review to find out was that something that could have played on the performance of the players, and that is something I'm prepared to wait before I answer a question like that. But playing what-if games to me at this point, especially publicly, to me is a waste of time.
Yeah, well, you see, that's the thing, you know, Jimmy. The what-if game that I'm trying to engage you in, and it's not a what-if game, is just to answer some of the questions that are swirling at this point. People are talking, and the primary stakeholders of Windies cricket, of course, are the fans, because without them, then all of this is meaningless. So you do understand the perspective that we're coming from in trying to seek whether or not there was any misgivings about the decision at the time to support the team with the coaching and management staff that actually went with them to England.
I most certainly understand the fact that people are searching for answers. I think that's natural, and that is something that I would encourage as well. I'm just saying that in my position, there's a process that has to be carried out, and before that is done, you're not going to get me saying much on what has gone in the past, other than to say that the review will be done, and then coming out of that review, we'll have a few more answers, and hopefully, I would say, pretty robust plans going forward on how we prepare in the short term for white ball cricket, and probably more long term for the next World Cup.
Well, let me move to this then. Is it that after the review and the answers are documented, in what form will that be shared with the public? Will it just be choice sections of your report that is shared with the public, or will there be a frank and open discussion to say, gentle people of the region, this is what we have found, these are the things we are working on from the report, this is what we intend to do going forward? How will you do that?
I can't speak on behalf of the organization. What I will say is that once the report is handed to the board, which is the whole plan is to get this report in, with the recommendations, I would think through the cricket committee to the main board of directors. It is up to them to decide, how much and what of it they want to share with the public.
But would you certainly, from your position, encourage them to make full disclosure so that the entire Windies cricket family can see for themselves what the details of that post-mortem, post-World Cup are, and be in tune with what the issues that need fixing in the immediate term are? Would you certainly support that in your position as Director of Cricket?
I think that you share as much as you can. I've been in the game long enough to know that there are certain things that you can and certain things that you can't share. But I would certainly be saying share as much as you can so that there is as much transparency as possible. Obviously you don't want to have a situation where people are challenging the transparency of an organization, be it West Indies Cricket Board or the Jamaica Cricket Board or SportsMax, you know what I mean? So I'd always advocate for as much transparency as possible.
You've been in the position since January 2017. This World Cup now, of course, is your first 50 over World Cup with the team. Would you say that based on where things are now, we are in a strong position to go forward, notwithstanding what the results of the post-mortem show?
Well, I will always maintain that we have raw material within the territories to construct very good teams across all formats, whether it be T20, 50 over or Test cricket. The challenge for me continues to be how we, in a figurative way, take the goal out of the ground, which is there, and develop it into a world-class product. For as long as we have that goal in the ground, I'll always be very optimistic. Not to take away from the challenge of actually developing our players to world-class standards. But if you have the raw material, then I think you have a very strong starting point.
I hear you on the issue of raw material, but some will say that for cycle after cycle, we seem to be producing players, not that they're not of the standard of West Indies players of yesteryear, but certainly they're not performing with the level of consistency, because you have players of varying ability, but you don't get the best of them cycle after cycle. How do you see us affecting that in the immediate term, Jimmy? That seems to be a major problem.
I think consistency is learned behavior, not just in sport but in life. I think we need to cast a spotlight on how we develop our players. Is there a chink in how we develop players, which can potentially in the future affect that critical area? Because this is not the first cycle, as you quite rightly say, that we're looking at this particular issue, which is consistency. It is something that has dogged our cricket for a very long time. I think that the answer lies partly in the way in which we develop our players. And those are a lot of, I mean, we could take that apart for the next 2 hours, but just to say that I do think that until we crack that particular issue, the cricket will probably continue to frustrate us because we'll continue to see players with immense talent and who from time to time show us and the whole world that they're really capable of great things. But we just want to see it on a more consistent basis.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of when you'll be finishing with those consultations, those interviews I'm sure you're going to conduct one-on-one to prepare this report for submission to the board?
I'd like to get it done before the India series starts.
Go again?
Before the India series starts.
Before the India series, all right? That's a target, hopefully. So I ask you finally, in the current environment, Jimmy, where given the state of board-player relations, given the health of cricket, or relatively speaking, the health of cricket in the individual territories, notwithstanding the World Cup performance, do we have an environment, you think, from which we can elicit some success in the medium term?
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done across the board in the region, in our development structures, both at franchise level and I would say going down the food chain as well, not just at franchise, but if you go down to junior levels as well, under 19s, under 15s. I think there's scope for a lot of work to be done there. But again, I say that because we have the raw material, and we also have a lot of people who are committed to West Indies cricket in various capacities, that are very hopeful that we can get that sort of environment that will pull through our players in the medium to long term, and not just have players who can show from time to time that they ought to be at the international level, but actually dominating on a consistent basis.
And I ask you this, definitely the last one. In terms of mentality, we hear this word being used a lot, Jimmy. Would you say there's anything different in the mentality of the Windies players now active compared to the Windies squads that you were a part of in your career?
That's a tough one because the times have changed. And it's a difficult question to answer without taking that into consideration. I do think that we had a stronger, what would I call it, maybe a stronger development process when my generation and those maybe previous to me were coming through. So if you just take the standard of first-class cricket, I don't know if Wayne Lewis is with you, but I think Wayne could attest to the fact that the standard of first-class cricket, as one example, was higher than it is now. And the follow-on from that is that then when you selected players into international cricket, the gap between where they were coming from and what they were aspiring to was a little bit less than what we have now. And so the challenge is how can we close that gap? And the strategy now might be different from the strategy 15 years ago and the strategy 30 years ago, simply because times have changed.
Hear you on that. Well, I look forward to the completion of your work before the India series and look forward to it being shared with the cricket-loving public in the Caribbean and for us to talk about the findings that you would have come up with, Jimmy.
It's always been fun.
Excellent. Thank you.